Hi, good morning, everyone. Apologies, I was tapping around with my fingers there with my first slide. So I'm Ginetta. I'm a family doc and a researcher in Amisquithewascahigan or Edmonton, pronounced she, her, L. Um, and uh, I'm a settler here. And I will just move forward to the next slide, though, just as we have included a land acknowledgement. Um, we live and work in Amisquithewascahigan or Beaver Hills House, which is the literal translation of the original name for Edmonton, located within the northern prairies of Turtle Island, the original name for North America. For thousands of years, this has been and continues to be a common territory to many people, including the Nehiyah or Cree, the Sioux, the Stoney, the Dene, the Opetumisewak or Métis, the Blackfoot, and many more. This place is also known as Métis Nation Region Number 4 and Treaty 86 territory. When I do my land acknowledgements, I include a wheel of power and privilege, just to situate myself and remind myself that I usually find myself very close to the middle of the wheel. When I'm doing participatorily oriented research, I feel that it is my job to deliberately attempt to make some connections closer to the margins and somewhat disrupt the structures that allow this wheel to continue. Um, before I move on, is there anything you want to share about yourself before we keep going, Ronnie?
Just that my name is Ronnie, my pronouns are she, they, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Ronnie was an incredible part of a very lovely dream team, and this work was done by and for and with community. We had a nonprofit partner. We had us academics. We had some trainees. And we also had people who were within community who had deep knowledge of the community itself. And so really, really appreciate Ronnie, Asha, Bethany, and Les's involvement within this project in particular. Um, because they were indispensable. So that's why I'm super happy Ronnie is here with me today. Um, I know that this is based on a manuscript that we do have published now. I encourage you to read it as we kind of do a deep dive into what we'll be talking about today, but I'll give you the Coles notes to the best of my ability, and Ronnie's going to share a little bit from her perspective when we get into um, the specific approaches that we took together. But ultimately, why did we do this? So, people who use drugs in Western Canada are facing multiple intersecting health threats, and that includes disruption of pre pandemic support systems, an increase in poisoning deaths, as I know everyone is acutely aware of, houselessness, poor mental health, climate displacement, and so on. In this era of polycrisis, we have a lot of disinformation and demonization of people who use drugs and disruptions of care. We need to push back against harmful narratives, and we need to include people who use drugs within the discussion about how do we design health and social systems to best meet their needs. So, how do we as researchers give voice to community such that the community shares its truth and imagines the way forward? And how do we create the preconditions that are needed for those co created solutions to be heard? So, that was our impetus in doing research in this way and doing the research at all. I'm very mindfully aware that we should not be doing research that isn't desired or needed to improve things. So I'll just draw your attention to the lower right, and I don't know if anyone here is super familiar with the what's been going on in Edmonton in the last few years. This study took place in the context of the closure of an important healing space in the community that you see is a building on the right that has now been torn down. This is Boyle Street Community Services, and it was a gathering place for many people who are unhoused, many people on the street, many of whom identify incidentally as Indigenous. It was shut down on September 13th, 2023, which of course coincides with the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And part of that, it's the juxtaposition here is that we've got this professional sports team that plays on the other side of this road, and there is a definite gentrification and displacement going on. So this is a round dance from that very month just before they closed, and the building's been bulldozed. So we saw it as a very palpable, very literal opportunity to rebuild with the community directly involved. Our research and objectives were to document community voice priorities for care and also to identify community assets that can be mobilized as part of that process. So we use community-based participatory research as kind of our framework for the study, emphasizing co-creation, buy-in with community at every stage to ensure an equitable and collaborative approach aligned with the study's goal. And it just research on CBPR emphasizes the need for everyday ethics in decision making, where research team members themselves are embedded participants and they have these situated and partial relationships, responsibilities, values, and commitment. And this frames and constrains their ways of seeing, judging, and acting in particular situations. And then you had a bunch of us who were adjacent to community, but not from community, and trying to support and find a way forward together. Also, building from the premise that research with people who use drugs must be adaptive to the complexity of the poly crisis and its loss and grief and violence and displacement and mistrust. The project was also informed by complexity theory, which is a framework for understanding how to implement change in complex systems. And so if you tailor interventions to the specific context, and you take a dynamic process and an iterative process, then complexity theory helps to guide the development of effective and adaptive solutions in the system. So we kind of were dually informed by CBPR and complexity. And that's why we took the approach that we did. So that's what I'll give you the specifics of what we did, and then we'll dive deeper into the how with Ronnie's help. So we asked, how do you care for yourself and others? Sense making is an ongoing collective reflection and understanding of a community identified issue. So we went out into the community to do some software supported, team facilitated storytelling in the form of micro narratives, literally with tablets and stuff, and the team just kind of brainstormed stories together and pulled it together into written word. And this was followed by self-interpretation. We include a couple of diagrams there on the right. So this is self-interpretation of the story. Give your story a title. What is the story about? What was threatened? What were sources of support? And one of our favorite and most useful questions, follow-up questions for people to help interpret the story, was reflecting on your experience in an imagined better future, what would have been different? One of our colleagues talked about, what about waving a magic wand? What would look different about this story? So, and then asset mapping was an optional component of the data collection session where participants answered the question either how do you care for yourself and others in the community, or what do you carry in your bundle to help care for yourself and others? The latter question builds on a concept of personal, sacred, or healing objects that were wrapped in cloth, or a metaphorical bundle grounded in Northern Plains Cree culture. We invited participants to find magazine images. We gave them kind of other art supplies, and they were able to build mini collages that answered either of these questions. The participants then self-categorized their answers on a visual bar chart, structured by categories that the research team had created. For example, people, places, and resources, and additional categories that were created as we went with community members. And I will say that Ronnie spent a lot of time as that I always think of it as the Walmart greeter, but as the host of the art space. So, and they were very, very good at that job. It was a lot of fun to see the team grow into roles that really, really fit them. So the success of the what depends on the how. So I'm just going to pivot over to highlighting our approach. And there's a lot of folks here in these photos. Les and Bethany getting ready to go out on a mobile data collection shift on the left. They're from community. You'll see Ronnie there sitting around the table with Les and Bethany, as well as Asha on the right. And That was the core community team. And then Colton was one of the medical student trainees who worked with us that summer. So we co-created the study protocol together, from recruitment to distress protocols to data management. In addition to developing these procedures, we had collaborative planning conversations on how to build trust and safety for everyone. University field safety guidance, for example, it includes important reminders about employee and student safety, and it doesn't mention participant well-being. In this context, participant safety is it it can't just be carved off and considered only in research ethics board workflow alone. We're ultimately sitting together in the data collection room. And so we saw safety as inherently relational and about dynamics between the team and the community. And we have to remember that for some team members, they've been in this community where they've lived and worked for decades. And then there's other folks on the team, for example, poor Colton, our medical student who's just getting oriented. So we acknowledge that we have diverse positionalities, and that our sense of research ethics and safety and comfort, they're all interrelated, and there's mutual and reciprocal processes. Our backgrounds inform that study design, including the knowledge of some Métis and Cree team members. And then through this, we also had to remember to prioritize our personal growth and development and team wellness. That was an incredibly important team value. Over to Ronnie. Anything else you want to say about this process of just getting used to each other and orienting each other?
Yeah, I think I'd like to add that we had something that I really appreciated that we did is have a conversation about like what feels safe to us and what boundaries that we make us feel most safe as individuals, and how we can like support that um, for each other, basically. And just like understanding that we have like open conversation with each other. Um, and we also all did outreach together, which was really nice to be out in community, like aside from research and just
Yeah, and
experience
it
of
was,
being
I think it
out.
was, yeah, I think it was important for team members from community to also just suss out how non-community team members were going to behave and just figure out what they needed to know stat in order to function in the space. So there was definitely
Yeah.
some bidirectional teaching going on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the point number two that we talked about in the manuscript and that we used in our process was bridging trust for research connection. And there we are on a field day. We were just outside of the nonprofit buildings who co-hosted us. And there's Asha and Ronnie doing what they do best. Um, I also want to draw attention to images of safety in this, especially on the right. So there's traditional medicines, which we agreed collaboratively as a group that we wanted to have the opportunity to smudge for community members who wanted that. Always had a buddy system. We had field activity plan, food. Food is a way to de-escalate, trust building, art, again, as a way to just regulate, and naloxone, obviously, is a more tangible form of immediate safety. So members of the research team participated in medicine picking with Indigenous elders to better understand the medicine's significance in the context of our research. And in line with no local Nahia protocols, the team offered tobacco to Indigenous participants before asking them to share their stories, offering tobacco and other traditional medicines such as sage and sweetgrass, and providing snacks favored by the community, supported relationship building and helped make the community members feel welcome and respected. Within the asset mapping piece that you see the bar charts there, the conversations created comfort to elicit sharing that often became the focus of the subsequent narrative data collection. And through this phase, our research assistant team found that they were simultaneously observing and experiencing some of the same challenges recorded in the sessions. So we saw encampment sweeps, for example, increased policing in areas, and you could just get a vibe, you got a sense, and you were experiencing it all at the same time as people were telling their stories about it. Anything else you want to add here, Ronnie?
Um, I think I was just going to add that we were all just harm reduction workers, and Les has been a huge pillar in community since before Boyle Street, really. So having him there was really just like a big pillar of trust. Yeah, and all of us already had like built upon connections. Like we already had relationships with a lot of people and already had trust in our community. And so going out there with um kind of like activities and like stuff to do with people, they were a bit more like keen to hang out with us. Yeah.
Yeah, I still have people coming up to me and say, I want to do more art. Like, let me do more. So we're still at it. We had a community research day recently, and I don't have a lot of copies of the actual zine, which is an output here. I can certainly share PDF, or not a PDF, a link to it in the chat later. But like our first knowledge mobilization out the gate was art, was a community report back that was art based. So we can get into those weeds later.
Yeah.
um, so meeting people where they are was kind of the third theme that we want to talk about with our process. So we began early core team analysis sessions iteratively with data collection to identify specific patterns within the data set, as well as occasional demographic and domain gaps. So reflecting on the process in real time enabled our final sequencing of data collection to be equity oriented and to get some more targeted sampling. So for example, a desire to better understand the experiences of subpopulations led us to move data collection to other hubs with targeted services for youth and for LGBTQ2S plus community members. Also to document the perspectives of people using fentanyl, for example, because we were finding they were not sticking around in our service hubs for as long as people who primarily use stimulants. So to document the perspectives of people using fentanyl, we carried out our initial plan to incorporate mobile data collection efforts at local parks rather than relying on recruitment from only one location. So those are a couple of strategies that we used to pivot and to meet people where they were at. Ronnie, over to you for that one.
Yeah, we went to parks that we knew were super popular and a lot of people would hang out in already and also were more comfortable in. And we went to multiple parks around Bissell and Boyle Street, kind of around central Edmonton. And we also went to the library that's located downtown as well. So just probably like 10 blocks away from Boyle, or the old Boyle. And that was great as well to get different perspectives there, like kind of going back to what Janetta said in the last slide of how, depending on where we were at, you would get different stories that would be happening in real time. There was stories like that that would happen at the library that wouldn't be happening at Bissell, for example, like interactions with security, for example. So I think it was really important to just have a lot of locations and meet people where they're at.
Yeah, thanks. And then the fourth thing that we really wanted to highlight that we wrote about in our paper was accountability. So we talked about iterative sense making and making. This is one of our analysis sessions on the left, and this is celebration on the right. We won a poster award at the first conference we presented to. Um, so reporting back and sharing what we learned, starting with community, we have a community report. We're working on a more technical report as well for policymakers and decision makers. But participation in community events was really important to us. Community members have continued to express interest in having an ongoing program or a process where people can simultaneously or similarly share their experiences and input. And we have committed to working with host organizations and municipal and provincial policymakers where we can for policy and practice change. Um, Over to Ronnie.
People still ask us if we're doing research, they want to do it again. They want to do art, they want to come back and do this again. So I think that's really lovely. And we also still show up in community. I mean, like the three, four of us are still harm reduction workers. We're still in community. We're still out here. So um, we're still hanging out. And yeah, it's really nice to see the community's response and then also that we're responding back to them.
Yeah, so here's a teaser of what the community has shared with us. We're working on kind of getting our findings out a little bit more formally, but here are some themes that came out loud and clear to us. So caring for self and caring for community are fundamentally intertwined. You can't have caring for self without caring for others. That's just not the ethic for this community. So really, really important. And how do we support people within that caring role, right? We need those support services. We need formal support services to support health and wellness, but we also need to be aware people are leading this work in community. So how do we support them professionally to make that happen? Moving from the lens of criminalization, there's constant policing of bodies from the street. To how do we move from that lens of criminalization to service utilization and just providing people with the services that they're requesting? Centering both housing and home. So we can't just house people without thinking about that transition, thinking about that home. Incidentally, I mean, that was one of the big transitions people talked about, was between being on the street and not being on the street, and what makes someone feel comfortable in their home, but also transitioning out of youth oriented care supports into adulthood. There were a few other transitions, such as climate displacement and so on, that show up in the data set. But last but not least is visiting and connecting are the medicine. So there is a Métis Cree concept of Geokewin, which is the visiting way, which we have started to think through a little bit more deeply. But visiting and connecting themselves are a way to build and repair relationships and to heal. And the context here is that we have lost absolutely all of our drop-in spaces in Edmonton. And there are very, very few opportunities now for people to just connect, to learn across generations, to convey knowledge, to share with each other, to grieve, to vent. So our recommendations to the various interest holders out there are, we really need to revisit, what does that look like? How do we create the opportunity for connection? I'm just sharing a few stories that were freely shared. So we had 215 total. Through the storytelling, we're getting a deep understanding of current experiences and to help us ensure future service provision. Um, I'll just let you sit with these rather than read them verbatim. And so we have 215 beautiful stories just like this. Um, in bold are the titles that people again gave their own story. And every one of these stories, there were many people who just, again, imagined a way forward. So you'll see not all of the stories are negative. Many of them have a very positive direction too. I loved the birthday story, for example. It's one of my favorite ones. All right. So at the end of the day, under conditions shaped by crisis upon crisis, astronomical loss of life, near constant displacement, colonial violence, etc., etc., research by and with people who use drugs must be as flexible as the changing picture of the problem it seeks to document, co-creating interventions that can readily change in response to the needs that are identified by community. So we propose a collaborative process that's designed and implemented with people who use drugs, planning and readily adjusting as needed to co-create that innovation in the system. We recommend an accountable, relational, and complexity-oriented approach. And yeah, relationships reduce harm. This was my backyard a couple of summers ago, where we celebrated together. A summer well done. And that is it. In this frame, you will see in the bulldoze healing space that we all loved, many of my teachers and friends who've died as a result of the drug war. So just a shout out to Karen and Keith and Lenny and Jerry and others. So I would just want to acknowledge that this is part of the reason we keep doing the work, is because of these teachers. So hi. I'm more than happy to take questions along with Roddy now.